Hello and welcome from the UK. Today I will be taking you through my latest CD purchases from charity shops. Charity shops reopened last week as we start to re-emerge from the coronavirus lockdown. First up, I have a best of by Buffy St Marie called Soldier Blue, the best of the Vanguard Years, which was released on the Ace label in 2010. Amongst the tracks, it's got Universal Soldier and Cod'ine from her first album. I can recommend a cover version of Cod'ine if you've not heard it by the Charlatans, who were a San Francisco band from the late 60s that included Dan Hicks, who went on to Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks, and Mike Wilhelm, who joined the Flaming Groovies in the mid-1970s. The booklet is rather nice as well, and includes liner notes by the music journalist Ken Hunt. Next up we have some folk music, and it's a trio led by Sylvain Baru, a French flautist, and he's joined by DONAL Lunny on the bouzouki and bodhran, and he of course was a founder member of the Bothy band, Planxty and Moving Hearts. And on concertina we've got PADRAIG RYNNE. And some more folk music. Karen Matheson, she's the lead singer in Capercaillie, and on this album Downriver she's joined by, amongst other musicians, DONAL Lunny. And we move from folk to post-rock with Explosions in the Sky, and this is their second album, which is called Those Who Tell the Truth Shall Die, and this was only 25p. And from the same shop I got this for 25p, Kate Bush, The Red Shoes. This is a nice double CD compilation of Nick Lowe called Quiet Please, and it covers the period from Brinsley Schwartz through the early solo singles that he did for Stiff and for Radar, Rockpile, the band that he had with Dave Edmunds, and on through his solo albums in the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s, and it was released on the proper label. As on the previous video I will be putting details of the CDs I mentioned in the description below so that you can investigate further on YouTube or Spotify if you want to hear them. A London band with African origins that emerged in the early 1970s, Osibisa, and this is a double CD bringing together their first two albums, Osibisa and Woyaya, and it's notable for the covers which were designed by Roger Dean, who worked with Yes and Uriah Heep and other progressive rock bands, so they picked up a progressive rock audience in the early 70s. Soul compilation on the Goldmine label, The Northern Soul of Philadelphia. There's 28 tracks by artists that are pretty obscure to me, but you've got Timmy and the Empires, The Symbols, Johnny Parker, Honey and the Bees, Cindy Scott, The Inspirations, and it's a nice CD. And a similar album on Goldmine, the Stafford Story, and this one's got 24 tracks including artists such as Arthur Freeman, Jackie Day, Roy Wright, Richard Anthony, Jimmy and the Entertainers, the Gillettes. Doll by Doll were now a band that emerged in the late 70s. They were led by Jackie Levin and the guitarist John Shaw. Their first album I can highly recommend, which was called Remember. By the time of their fourth album, the rest of the band had departed, and it was effectively a solo album by Jackie Levin, and it's spoilt by 1980s pop production, which has really dated. He remains, though, a fascinating figure, a great songwriter. So if you can get past the 80s pop production, there's still a lot to enjoy in his voice and the lyrics that he writes. And moving on, this is the last album that Jerry Lee Lewis released. I think he was 79 years of age when he recorded this in 2014, Rock and Roll Time, and he's joined by various rock luminaries such as Neil Young, Robbie Robertson, who else? Keith Richards. This is an album I really like by Julie Doiron, and it's called I Can Wonder What You Did With Your Day, and it's released on the Jaguar label. If you see anything on Jaguar, it's worth picking up because most of what they release is very interesting. Julie Doiron, she's a Canadian singer-songwriter, and in the early 90s she was in a band signed to Sub Pop Records. The band was called Eric's Trip, and they had influences from Dinosaur Jr. I could hear elements of Mudhoney, and they were named after a Sonic Youth song. This album is notable because she records with Rick Wright, who was in Eric's Trip, and some of the tracks have a more stripped back version of the sound that Eric's Trip had in the 90s. The fourth album by Gillian Welch, I paid 25p for this. It's called Soul Journey. She's steeped in old-time country, exemplified by the Carter family. On this album, she expanded her sound palette to include some electric instrumentation. And as always, she recorded the songs with her husband, Dave Rawlings. More country, late period George Jones. I think this came out in about 2001, and his voice sounds fine, especially on the title track, The Rock. Leroy Parnell, another country artist, he actually recorded a version of The Rock 7 years before George Jones. The most notable track on this album is Baton Rouge, which was co-written by Guy Clark, and Guy Clark contributes some vocals to that track as well. If you've not heard of Guy Clark, I can recommend his first album from 1976, Old Number One, which has absolutely classic songwriting. Desperados, Waiting for a Train, LA Three-Way, just two of the fantastic songs on that album. This is an artist who sadly passed away 2 or 3 years ago, Richard Swift. It's on Secretly Canadian, and it brings together his first 2 proper albums, Walking Without Effort and The Novelist. I can hear influences in his songwriting from great songwriters of the 70s such as Van Dyke Parks, Randy Newman, Harry Nilsson, and I strongly recommend all of his work. He was an excellent artist. And this is a record I can't recommend. It's I Am a Wallet by Mccarthy. They emerged in the mid-1980s and were included on the NME cassette C86 of indie bands. I do like the guitar sound, which is very influenced by the Byrds, but the lyrics are laughable and really dated. I really can't get to grips with them. He has an influence of Marxism in his lyrics, which just make them a joke, really, for me. And the final CD that I've picked up was by the Vanity Set. Again, I picked this one up for 25 pence and didn't know anything about it, but I've checked, and it's a side project for the drummer from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. The drummer's called Jim Sklavounos, and his lead vocals are very similar to Nick Cave, and he has a deep baritone. If you're a hardcore fan of Nick Cave, I think there's quite a lot to enjoy in this album. And that's the last of the CDs I've picked up in the last week, and I will be posting more videos in the weeks to come.